If you are hearing these words when the night has settled and your body begins to soften in the darkness, then this is not just a moment of rest. This is the time Jung believed the door to the unconscious opens widest. By day, you live by the persona, the social mask that helps you be accepted, recognized, and safe. You react according to collective standards. You think according to common logic. And gradually, you forget the deeper part of yourself. But when you begin to sink into sleep, the ego no longer holds such tight control as before. Consciousness steps back, and in the overlap between waking and sleep, the shadow begins to move. The qualities you once denied. The emotions that do not fit the image you want to maintain. The wishes that are not allowed to exist. Jung said that if you do not face the shadow, it will live in your place. It will appear in repeated choices, in familiar relationships, in conflicts you do not understand why they keep repeating. Tonight, you do not need to fight the shadow. You only need to allow it to be present in the safe space of the unconscious. Sleep is not running away. It is the corridor leading into the process of individuation, the journey of integrating the parts that have been split apart in order to become more whole. When consciousness softens, the self, the profound center of the soul, has the chance to rearrange the inner order within you in a way that reason cannot do. But there is one important thing in this process. Keep silent. Do not tell anyone about what begins to change after tonight. The unconscious operates according to its own laws, and transformation must be shielded from the collective unconscious. Therefore, listen to this talk as a whisper that goes with you into sleep. Let what needs to be integrated take place in the dark. And if tomorrow morning you wake up differently, let that change grow in silence. Number 1. Do not tell anyone about what will happen after tonight. There are changes that do not enter our lives with clear noise. They do not come like a decisive decision or a powerful declaration. They come like a very slight movement inside. Like when the surface of a lake remains still, but in the depths, the current has begun to shift. If tonight something begins to stir within you, even if you cannot name it, even if you only feel a subtle difference in the way you breathe or listen to yourself, hold on to it. Do not tell anyone about what will happen after tonight. Not because you must hide it, but because it is in the most fragile state of the soul, and everything fragile needs to be protected from strong winds. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." That sentence does not only speak about loneliness in a social sense. It speaks about the distance between inner experience and language. There are things important enough that when you try to express them too early, you have made them smaller. Not because you lack words, but because deep experience is always wider than any structure of language. When a new awareness has just flickered, it is like the first light of dawn, still faint, still gentle, but enough for you to know that night no longer completely dominates. If you bring that light into hurried conversations and ask others to confirm it, you may cause yourself to begin to doubt. In the process of individuation that Jung described, a person must gradually separate from unconscious identification with the collective to return to the deep center of oneself, the self. But that separation does not begin with an outward rebellion. It begins with a very small inner shift in rhythm. You look at your life and realize everything is still fine, still right, still praised, but no longer alive. You play your role. You complete your responsibilities. You meet expectations. But at a deeper level, something has been silent for so long that you almost forget it ever existed. The collective unconscious is stronger than you think. It not only exists in clear rules, it lives in approving nods, in familiar advice like, "Everyone is like that. Don't think too much. Be realistic." When you begin to change, even only in the way you see, you inadvertently step out of the familiar orbit. And any system will try to pull you back, because stability is always more comfortable than uncertainty. Those reactions do not necessarily come from malice. They are simply the reflex of a structure that wants to maintain itself. I once knew a friend named Kate. She lived a life many people considered worth dreaming of. A solid job, a professional image, a stable relationship. She rarely showed inner disturbances, but for many months she repeatedly dreamed that she was standing in front of an old house with many closed rooms. In one dream, she opened a door and saw inside unfinished paintings she had once painted when she was young, before choosing a safer path. When learning about dream symbols through Jung, she began to understand that the house could be her psychological life, and the locked rooms were the forgotten parts. That night, she felt a deep clarity, but was very still. There was no drama. It was simply a gentle awareness that she had moved away from an important part of herself. But the next morning, she told the dream and that feeling to a few close people. They laughed and said she was being too sensitive, that everyone has to sacrifice passion for stability. Those words were not cruel. They were very normal, but they were enough to plant a seed of doubt. And within only a few days, the clarity of that night faded, like a dream dissolving under sunlight. What made Kate hesitate was not that her intuition was wrong. It was that it had not had enough time to take root. A sprout that has just broken through the soil is easily stepped on if its roots are not deep enough. But if it stays underground a little longer, its roots will go farther than you imagine. When it rises again, it is different. Inner transformation is the same. When it is still young, it needs privacy. It needs to be nourished in silence before it can bear the weight of looks and opinions. Keeping silent in this stage is an act of maturity. It is not withdrawal out of fear. It is respect for the inner process. You allow what is forming in you to grow without having to defend itself. You learn to trust your experience without needing immediate confirmation. And this requires courage. Because human beings naturally long to be understood, agreed with, and recognized. Imagine you are building a bridge from the old shore to the new shore of yourself. At first, that bridge is only a few thin planks laid temporarily across an empty gap. If you invite the whole world to stand on it when it is not yet firm, you may cause it to collapse. But if you quietly reinforce each part, letting the structure beneath be completed, when the bridge is strong enough, you will cross without fear of falling. Silence is the time needed for the new structure inside you to become stable. Jung understood that the deepest turning points do not happen on a stage. They happen in solitude. Not solitude because there is no one beside you, but because you cannot immediately communicate what is changing within you. And in that solitude, you learn to take responsibility for your soul. You learn to listen without rushing to turn everything into words. Do not tell anyone about what will happen after tonight, because you do not yet need agreement. If that change truly belongs to you, It will continue to grow even if no one knows. And when it is strong enough, you will no longer be shaken by advice or by looks. Then, if you choose to share, you will do it from a firm foundation, not from the need to be recognized. There is a very deep lesson here. Not everything sacred needs to be announced. Some of the most important movements in your life will happen in absolute silence. And that silence is what makes them real. When you learn to protect the subtle changes in your soul, you are giving the self the chance to lead without being interrupted by outside noise. Tonight, if a door somewhere quietly opens inside you, let it open in stillness. Let it go deep before it goes far. Let it rearrange the inner structure within you before you seek confirmation from the outside. Trust that what truly belongs to you will not disappear just because you do not speak about it. On the contrary, your silence will give it space to grow, to take root, to become something strong enough to change your whole life from within, quietly yet irreversibly. Number 2. When you sink into sleep, the unconscious begins to restructure you. And when you have chosen to keep the fragile movements of your inner world for yourself, when you are no longer rushing to tell what is changing inside you in order to seek recognition, then the real process begins to move into deeper layers. By day, you can think about growth. You can read, analyze, and decide to become different. But core restructuring does not happen under the light of will. It happens when you sleep, when the body softens, when the breath slows, when the ego, the part that always wants to understand, control, maintain an image, moves back. The unconscious begins its silent but thorough work. You do not see that process. You do not hear its sound. But each night, you are being rearranged. By day, you exist within a familiar structure of yourself. You have a story about yourself, who you are, what you are good at, what you fear, and what you would never do. That story helps you orient yourself. It creates a sense of stability, but it also limits you. Because any story told for too long begins to remove details that do not fit. Emotions that do not match the image you want to maintain are pushed down. Longings that do not fit the current role are ignored. Painful memories are folded up and stored in a sealed compartment. Your surface becomes orderly, but underneath is a complex system that has not been integrated. When you sink into sleep, that surface softens. Consciousness no longer holds the central position. You no longer have to maintain an image, no longer have to react correctly, no longer have to control the story. And in that withdrawal, the unconscious begins to work. Dreams are not a chain of random images, they are the language of restructuring. Carl Jung wrote, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul. That little door opens when you let go. And through that door, the deepest parts of you begin to move." Imagine your soul as a vast, ancient library. By day, you read only a few familiar books, chapters about work, family, goals, and responsibilities. You know exactly where they sit on the shelf. You believe that is the whole story. But on higher floors and in deeper basements, there are countless books that have never been opened. Forgotten manuscripts, unfinished pages. When you sleep, you are no longer standing at the main reading desk. You step into areas with less light. The invisible librarian begins to move books, change their places, open pages you once skipped. Memories are placed beside new emotions. daytime experiences are inserted into old stories, and through that arrangement, new meaning is formed. This process is not linear at all. It does not happen in a logical sequence like your daytime thinking. You may dream of returning to an old classroom, even though you left it years ago. You may dream of talking to a younger version of yourself. You may dream of a door that cannot be opened, or a key that cannot find its lock. Those images are symbols of a structure being adjusted. A classroom may be where you once learned a lesson that was not completed. A younger version may be the innocent part that has not been integrated. A locked door may be a memory or an emotion you are not ready to touch in the daytime. The unconscious always moves toward wholeness. When one part of you is exaggerated, for example, you are too strong, too rational, too controlling, the other part will find a way to appear. In sleep, you may see yourself weak, lost, or dependent. That does not mean you are regressing. It means the inner structure is being balanced. The unconscious does not oppose the ego. It only places the ego in its proper position within a larger totality. Restructuring can be uncomfortable. When an old belief that no longer fits is dismantled, dreams may reflect collapse. You may dream your house is cracking. You may dream you are falling from a height. Those images may wake you with a racing heart. But just as restoring an ancient building requires touching its weakest parts, psychological restructuring requires you to see what is no longer stable. In dreams, you are shaken without truly being destroyed. You are confronted without paying the price in real life. In literature, remember J. Gatsby in The Great Gatsby. Throughout his life, Gatsby builds a glittering image of himself to cover the past and the lack inside. He lives inside a story he created, believing that with enough effort, he can reshape his entire identity. But the repressed truth eventually rises. Through a Jungian lens, Gatsby is the image of the ego trying to impose a story on the whole psychological structure, while the deeper part is not integrated. When the unconscious has no symbolic space to restructure gradually, disillusionment can come suddenly and tragically. Your sleep each night is the chance for what has been pushed down not to explode, but to be adjusted in the safe space of symbols. You may not remember most of your dreams. That does not mean nothing happens. Just as you are not aware of each heartbeat while sleeping, you are not aware of each inner structural change, but you feel the result. A decision that once confused you suddenly becomes clearer. Anger that once smoldered suddenly softens. A relationship that once made you tense is suddenly seen with gentler eyes. Those changes do not come from daytime advice. They come from hundreds of small adjustments in the dark. What matters is that you do not interfere with this process. When you bring too much stimulation into the night, bright screens, noisy news, unrelieved tension, you disrupt the space the unconscious needs to work fully. Sleep is not only rest for the body, it is a sacred space for the psyche to self-adjust. If you treat it as a meaningless blank, you miss half of the process of growing up. What you need to do is not complicated. Before sleeping, lower the light, reduce the noise, and slow the pace. Spend a few minutes letting your breath slow. Let the body know the day has ended. When you wake up, if you still remember an image, write it down in a few short lines. No need to analyze right away. No need to impose meaning. Just note it. Over time, you will recognize repeating symbols, corridors, bodies of water, and houses. That is how the unconscious shows you the inner structure is being reorganized. If you are ready to give trust to this process, leave one sentence in the comments, "I trust my unconscious." But more important than that comment is the attitude you bring into tonight. Sleep like someone who knows they are being restructured. Let go like someone who knows they do not need to control everything in order to grow. And in the next part, you will begin to touch what the unconscious is quietly bringing up. The shadow. The part not yet integrated. The part that will change the whole way you see yourself. Number 3. The moment between sleep and waking, where the ego dissolves. After the unconscious has finished its hidden work in the night. After the symbols have moved, after the inner structures have been adjusted without you knowing, a boundary as thin as a thread appears, the moment between sleep and waking, where the ego dissolves. Not dissolving like a collapse, not like a crisis, but dissolving like mist retreating before the first light of day. In those very brief seconds, you have not yet remembered who you are. Your name has not sounded in your mind. Your role has not been called awake. Relationships, responsibilities, goals, pressures, all remain far away, as if waiting for you to step through an invisible door to return. And in that fragile quiet, you touch a deep truth, that in the daytime you are rarely still enough to feel. The ego is not the whole of you. A very subtle moment when you are simply present. No identity, no story, no image. You are not yet a good person or not good enough. You are not yet someone trying or someone failing. You are simply existing. And if you are slow enough to notice, you will feel that in this existence there is a sensation both empty and wide open, as if you are standing before a space not yet filled by familiar definitions. A follower of the channel once shared that every morning, right before opening her eyes, she experiences a strange few seconds, no longer dreaming but not quite awake either. In that moment, she is no longer the person who must manage work and family, no longer under pressure to be good enough or to prove anything. There is only a light and very real quiet, as if she is drifting between the two shores of night and day. But as soon as the first thought appears, a meeting, a responsibility, a worry, all familiar roles and expectations immediately return. She said she always feels as if she has just dropped something very pure, and she wonders whether the state of being nobody for those few seconds is a kind of being lost. But from the perspective of Jungian psychology, what she experiences is not being lost. It is a precious opening in the structure of the ego. It is the time when I has not yet reasserted its power. In those seconds, the autobiographical memory system, the thing that helps you maintain a continuous sense of self, is not fully operating. The ego, built from the repetition of the personal story, has not yet assembled all the pieces. And when the structure is not complete, you have the chance to touch a deeper level of existence, not losing yourself, but being present before becoming yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming yourself is not strengthening the ego until it is hard like stone. On the contrary, it is the process of realizing the ego is only a part of the whole psychological structure. The moment between sleep and waking is living proof of that. Each morning, you are given a brief experience of not being identical with the ego. You see that you still exist, even when the story of you has not yet been told again. Modern psychology calls this the hypnopompic state, the transitional state when you have just woken up. But consciousness is not yet fully stable. In this state, the boundary between the unconscious and consciousness is still soft. Images, emotions, and sensations are not yet organized by linear logic. You may feel suspended, but that suspension allows you to experience yourself without being locked into a fixed identity. Jung believed the ego is only a relative center of consciousness, and maturity requires the ego to recognize its limits. The moment between sleep and waking is where those limits naturally appear. Not yet called your name, you may feel as not yet called your name. You may feel as if you are standing on unstable ground. But that space is not nothingness. It has potential before it is framed. It is the space where you can see that you are not entirely bound by the old story. Imagine the ego as a coat of paint covering an ancient wall. By day, you look at the wall and see only the paint color, uniform, clear, and intentional. You believe that is the whole surface. But when the morning light is still dim, when the mist has not yet cleared, the paint does not appear complete. You begin to see small cracks, old layers once covered, rough walls beneath. The moment between sleep and waking is that dim light. It does not erase the paint. It only shows you there are many layers underneath. And when you realize that, you no longer believe the surface is the whole structure. The temporary dissolution of the ego is also the condition for you to touch the self, the deeper center of the soul that Jung speaks of. The self does not depend on roles. It is not built from praise or blame. It does not need to prove its worth. It is inherent wholeness. When the ego retreats for a few seconds, you can feel that depth, not as a philosophical idea, but as a very real sense. You are still there, even when you do not name yourself. What matters is not forcing this moment to last through tense effort. You do not need to turn it into a complicated ritual. You only need not rush. Add a few breaths before you sit up. Add a few seconds before touching your phone screen. Just observe the unnamed feeling. Recognize that you exist before the story begins. That observation is what gradually makes the unconscious more conscious. The lesson of this part is not in destroying the ego. The ego is still necessary. You need it to act, to decide, to interact with the world. But you no longer confuse it with the whole of you. Every morning, you are given proof that the ego can dissolve for a few seconds, and you remain intact. When you are brave enough not to turn away from that short, empty space, you begin to live differently. You act not only from the ego's defense, but from the steadiness of someone who knows they are larger than their story. The moment between sleep and waking is a narrow but deep door. Through that door, you see that you are not limited by the labels repeated every day. And when you are no longer afraid of that temporary dissolution, you step into the next journey with a different stance, softer, more awake, and ready to face the deeper parts waiting to be recognized. Number 4, what is denied in the dark is quietly controlling you. If the ego is not the whole of you, then where is the rest? And what is it doing when you do not look at it? This question is not comfortable, because as soon as you begin to suspect you are not only a role, not only a familiar story, you must face a deeper truth. There is a part of you that has been pushed into the dark, and that part has never stopped existing. Jung called it the shadow, not supernatural darkness, not evil in a simple moral sense, but the totality of qualities, emotions, impulses, and potential that you once denied because they did not fit the image you wanted to maintain. And Jung said a sentence that makes many people stop for a long time. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You do not become enlightened by imagining yourself as light. You grow when you dare to make the darkness conscious. The shadow forms very early. As a child, you learn to exist in a world of conditions. You realize some expressions are praised, some are criticized. You are loved when obedient, but corrected when angry. You are encouraged when sharing, but shamed when jealous. You quickly understand that to be accepted, you must keep one part and hide another. Gradually, you build a persona, the social mask that represents what is lit. And what does not fit is pushed down, sinking into the darkness of the unconscious. But what is pushed down does not disappear. It only loses the ability to be seen directly. The shadow is not silent. It finds a way to express itself. When you react strongly to an arrogant person, you may be touching ambition or the need to be recognized that you once denied. When you despise weakness in others, you may be hiding your own fear of vulnerability. Jung believed we tend to project the shadow outward. What you do not want to see in yourself will be seen very clearly in others, and you will believe the problem lies entirely in them. Projection helps the ego keep a clean image, but it also makes you lose control, because what you refuse to acknowledge will continue to control you from behind. Look at a myth rarely analyzed from this angle, the story of Narcissus. In Greek legend, Narcissus is so enchanted by his own reflection in the water that he cannot look away, and in the end, he wastes away and becomes a flower. On the surface, the story seems to speak only of excessive self-love. But through a Jungian lens, Narcissus can be understood as the image of an ego obsessed with itself, afraid to turn toward depth. He looks at the reflection, but does not dare to dive into the water. He loves his own shadow, but does not touch it. The shadow here is not only arrogance, it is the fear of facing the real depth beneath the surface. When you focus only on maintaining an image, you become trapped in reflection. And while you are busy watching yourself, the shadow continues to operate underneath. The shadow does not only contain bad qualities, it also contains potentials that have not been lived. Someone who always appears humble may have been taught that ambition is selfish. Someone who always appears strong may have learned to bury the need to be supported. Someone who always plays the good person may be hiding anger that has never been admitted. When these qualities are suppressed, they do not disappear. They transform into indirect behavior. Anger denied may become passive aggression. The need for attention denied may become self-sabotage. The desire for power denied may become manipulation in the dark. Imagine your soul as a garden. What is cared for, watered, and brought into light will bloom. But what is covered, neglected, still grows in its own way. If you do not recognize and prune it, weeds will spread. You may pretend the garden has only beautiful flowers, but the roots of weeds still creep underneath. The shadow does not need to be eliminated completely. It needs to be recognized and integrated. When you accept that you are capable of anger, you are no longer suddenly possessed by anger. When you admit you can be jealous, you no longer have to pretend to be noble. Honesty with darkness makes you freer, not because you become perfect, but because you become whole. Integrating the shadow is not indulging every impulse. It is not legalizing cruelty. It is bringing what has been denied into the light of consciousness, so you have the power to choose. When the shadow is unconscious, it controls you without you knowing. When it is brought into the light, you can decide how to act. The difference lies in consciousness. A person aware of their anger can use it to set boundaries. A person who denies anger will either explode or swallow it and accumulate resentment. This process requires courage, because when you look at the shadow, you will feel shame. You will see what you once did not want to admit. But in that admission, power returns. The shadow is only frightening when you turn away. When you dare to look, it becomes raw energy that can be transformed. In practice, you can begin with small observations. When someone triggers you strongly, instead of criticizing them immediately, ask yourself, what about them makes me so uncomfortable? Does that quality exist in some form in me? When you repeat a harmful decision, ask yourself, what familiar thing am I seeking? When you feel jealous, instead of denying it, ask, what is this saying about my longing? These questions are not to convict yourself. They are keys that open the basement door. The shadow does not disappear because you decide to become a good person. On the contrary, the more you try to be perfect, the more you push down. False perfection is fertile ground for darkness to grow. Jung believed that the journey of individuation requires you to go through darkness, not to avoid it. Because only when you accept you have both light and darkness do you truly become a whole human being. What is denied in the dark is quietly controlling you, not because it is stronger than you, but because you have not looked at it. When you bring the light of consciousness down to what was once hidden, you not only reduce invisible manipulation, you open the possibility of living more truthfully, no longer splitting yourself into two halves, no longer maintaining a perfect image that suffocates. You begin to live with deep honesty, with anger, weakness, ambition, jealousy, and potential not yet opened. And when you make the darkness conscious, you do not become a person of darkness. You become a person who can pass through darkness without being swallowed. That is not an easy journey, but it is a necessary step if you truly want to be free from the invisible forces controlling your life from behind. If these things touch you, if you recognize somewhere the image of yourself in these lines, share your feeling under the comments. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be analyzed too much. Just one honest sentence about what you are recognizing in your own darkness. Because sometimes the journey of making darkness conscious begins with a very simple admission: I have seen it. Number 5. The shadow rises when consciousness stops controlling. When you have realized that in the dark there is a rejected part still quietly operating, the next step is to look at the moment it truly steps forward, when consciousness stops controlling. Not when you are at your most awake, most disciplined, most clear-minded, but when you are tired, when you are tense, when you have been suppressed for too long, when the shell of "I'm fine" no longer has enough strength to hold its shape. In those moments, the shadow no longer stands behind. It comes to the surface. By day, your consciousness functions like a careful gatekeeper. It filters your words before you speak. It adjusts your expressions before others can notice the tremor inside. It reminds you to be proper, to be mature, to control yourself. Consciousness helps you survive in society. It is a necessary structure, but it also consumes energy. And psychological energy is not infinite. When you use too much to maintain an image, to suppress emotion, to become the version you should be, you are pushing pressure downward. Jung wrote, "There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. There is no light without darkness, and there is no psychic wholeness without accepting imperfection. But when you allow only light to appear, darkness will find another way." Look at a very ordinary story. There is someone always seen as calm. At work, they listen, coordinate, and resolve conflicts. They rarely lose their temper. People believe they are stable, solid. But that stability does not come from having no emotions. It comes from having learned to swallow them. Each time they are looked down on, they stay silent. Each time they are given unreasonable extra work, they smile. Each time they feel hurt, they tell themselves they must be strong. All day they maintain the image of an adult. But at night, when they get home, when no one is watching, something very small is enough to make them explode. It might be an unintentional question, an irritating sound, or a small delay. Their reaction is far greater than the cause. After that, they sit with regret, asking themselves why they were too much. From a Jungian perspective, that is not failure. That is the shadow rising when consciousness stops controlling. The anger is not new. It has accumulated all day. Consciousness has worked endlessly to keep it below. But when energy drops, when the gatekeeper grows tired, the door opens. The shadow does not appear to destroy. It appears because repressed energy cannot be held forever. Imagine your psyche as a sealed room with a ventilation system. If air circulates regularly, the room stays comfortable. But if you block every outlet because you fear an unpleasant smell, the pressure inside rises. Eventually, a tiny crack is enough for the air to burst out with force. The shadow is that burst of air. It is not an enemy. It is what has been held back too long. What is dangerous is not that the shadow rises. What is dangerous is that you do not recognize it as yours. When you say, "That isn't me," you continue to split yourself. But if you are honest enough to say, "This is a part of me I have never allowed to appear," you begin to move from denial to integration. That difference changes the whole way you live. The shadow does not appear only in anger, it can appear in desire. A person who always tells themselves they are not ambitious may suddenly feel intense jealousy when a colleague succeeds. A person who always plays the good one may secretly wish others would fail so they can be noticed. Those thoughts make them ashamed. They try to push them away, but the more they push, the stronger they become. Because the unconscious is not erased by will, it is only postponed. When consciousness stops controlling, you see yourself in a more raw state, not edited, not filtered through society. This can happen when you are too tired, when you are wounded, when you fall into a crisis, or even in moments close to sleep. Then, the things you once said, "I would never be like that," can be revealed. And instead of seeing that as a collapse, you can see it as an opportunity. From Jung's perspective, the rising of the shadow is an invitation into wholeness. You cannot integrate what you have never seen, and you cannot see what consciousness always covers. So the moment of losing control is not proof of weakness. It is the moment the unconscious sends a signal. Something needs to be acknowledged. This is very practical. Instead of only apologizing and blaming yourself after every excessive reaction, you can pause and ask, "What have I been suppressing before this?" Instead of trying to return to the old image as quickly as possible, you can observe the emotion that has just risen. When did it appear? Is it familiar? Is it connected to something in the past? These questions are not to dig endlessly. They are to open a dialogue. If you constantly maintain absolute control, you will live in chronic tension. But if you allow yourself to recognize small fluctuations before they explode, you begin to release pressure early. You can acknowledge anger when it is still mild. You can say, "I'm irritated," instead of giving a fake smile. You can acknowledge jealousy as a signal of an unlived desire, instead of seeing it as a moral failure. The shadow rises when consciousness stops controlling is not a sign that you have failed on the journey of maturity. On the contrary, it is an unavoidable part of individuation. You do not become whole by keeping yourself always within the frame. You become whole when you dare to look at what goes beyond that frame. When you are courageous enough to stay with discomfort instead of running away, you begin to transform it. So the next time you find yourself reacting more strongly than usual, do not only ask, "Why am I like this?" Ask deeper, "Which part of me has just been revealed?" When you are tired and irritable, do not only try to sleep, to forget. Look at what you have suppressed all day. When you are suddenly swept into an intense feeling, see it as a reminder that a part is seeking to be integrated. Consciousness is necessary. Control is necessary. But control is not the final goal. The goal is harmony between consciousness and the unconscious. When you no longer see the rising of the shadow as an enemy, you no longer have to fight yourself. You begin to live more softly, where light and darkness can coexist without denying each other. And perhaps the deepest thing you can learn here is this: you are not a perfect person who malfunctions when you lose control. You are a human being with depth, and each time the shadow rises, if you are awake enough to look, it does not collapse. It is a door opening to a deeper level of honesty with yourself. Number 6. Night is the workshop of the soul. Right here, when you have realized the shadow can rise when consciousness weakens, you begin to see night with different eyes. Night is no longer only the time the body rests after a long day. It is the space where the deepest part of you enters its work. By day, you operate by will, by goals, by the pressure to complete. By night, everything reverses. Will steps back, control softens, and in that softening, a silent process begins. Night is the workshop of the soul, where the scattered fragments of yesterday are melted, restructured, and set back into new positions. You do not see the process, but you live with its result. Jung wrote, "The dream arises from a part of the mind unknown to us, but not less important, and is concerned with the desires for the approaching day. That door opens only when you let go. By day, you are busy maintaining an image, solving problems, and reacting to the world. By night, when you lie still and your breath slows, the soul has space to do what you do not allow in daylight. Connect what seems unrelated, adjust inner misalignments, transform emotions you have not digested into a new form. Dreams are not a meaningless film. They are the symbolic language of that workshop process." Modern neuroscience provides an intriguing foundation for Jung's intuition. In deep sleep, and especially REM, the brain restructures memory, consolidates learning, and regulates emotion. Daytime experiences are not only stored, but they are also rearranged. Neural connections are strengthened or pruned. The brain seems to choose what to keep, what to release, This helps explain why, after a full night's sleep, a problem that felt stuck can become clearer. You have not necessarily thought more. You have been restructured. Look at Paul McCartney, a member of the Beatles. He said that one morning in 1964, just after waking, a complete melody sounded in his mind, so clear that he was sure he must have heard it somewhere before. He went straight to the piano near his bed and followed each note that had appeared in sleep. That melody later became "Yesterday," one of the most covered songs in music history. McCartney even spent weeks asking friends whether it might be an old tune he had unconsciously borrowed, because it came to him so whole. What is worth reflecting on is not only his talent, but also where the idea was born. Not in the studio, not in the tension of searching for inspiration, but in the moment. Consciousness had stepped back. When the ego rested, a musical structure arranged itself and rose to the surface. And this does not happen only to famous people. Every night, you also bring back to your own workshop what you have not yet digested, a sentence that hurt you, a decision still uncertain, an emotion you compress to get through the day. By day, you may be too busy to touch them. But when night falls and control softens, the inner process begins to work. Imagine a forge deep underground. On the surface, everything is quiet, but below, metal is heated and shaped in silence. By morning, you do not see last night's sparks. You only find yourself clearer, lighter, slightly different. Night is also where emotions that have not been fully lived seek to complete their cycle. There are sadnesses you do not allow yourself to cry by day. There are questions you avoid because you are too busy. There are fears you push aside to keep moving. But the soul does not forget. In dreams, you may see yourself returning to an old place, speaking with someone far away, or lost in a hallway with no exit. Those images are not meant to confuse you. They are how the workshop processes unfinished material. The paradox is that you cannot command the night to work as you wish. You cannot say, "Solve this fear tonight." You can only create conditions, and those conditions begin with how you enter the night. If you bring the noise of bright screens, rushing news, arguments not yet closed, you overload the workshop. The soul needs quiet to do its delicate work. Just as an artisan needs silence to carve, the unconscious needs the gentleness of darkness. In the journey of individuation, night is not an interruption of life. It is an essential part of maturity. By day, you collect experience. By night, you integrate. By day, you collide. By night, you digest. If you live only on the surface, without respecting depth, you will repeat the same lesson again and again. But when you allow night to work, you begin to change in ways that are not loud, but lasting. You may have experienced this. A decision that confused you all day suddenly becomes clear after you wake. Smoldering anger softens without further argument. A creative idea appears the moment you wake. That is not magic. That is the workshop finishing part of its work. You do not need to remember the entire dream to benefit from it. You only need to sleep deeply enough for the process to happen. The practice here is not complicated, but it requires consistency. Before sleep, take a few minutes to close the day. Not by scrolling on your phone until you collapse, but by a conscious act. It might be writing down something that troubles you. It might be admitting an emotion you have not named. This small act is like placing raw material on the blacksmith's table. Then you let go. No demand for results, No forcing dreams to follow a script. When you wake, instead of jumping up immediately, stay for a few breaths. Night has just finished its work. You do not need to understand at once what has changed. Just sense the subtlety within you. Maybe it is a lightness. Maybe it is a new thought. Maybe it is simply calmer. Over time, you will realize the biggest changes do not come from loud resolutions, but from nights you respect. Night is the workshop of the soul, because in that darkness, you no longer have to prove anything. You no longer have to hold an image. You no longer have to control every thought. And in that letting go, the deepest part of you is allowed to work. If by day you strive to become someone, by night the soul quietly reminds you to return to what you already are. When you understand this, you will no longer see sleep as an empty void, but as a sacred ritual of restructuring. And each morning, when the light returns, you enter the new day not only with restored energy, but with a more subtle shape of yourself, forged in the silent furnace of the night. If you feel these reflections are worth keeping, share this video with someone who is quietly moving through their own heavy late-night hours. There are things that are hard to name. You only feel tired without knowing why. You only feel your heart grow quiet without knowing what is being restructured. Sometimes, a gentle reminder at the right time is enough to help someone feel less confused about their own process. You do not need to explain it to them. You only need to open a small patch of light, and somewhere, in the quiet of the night, another soul is also being forged again, little by little, in its own way. Number 7. The mask falls in absolute silence. When you are still enough to stop turning away from what is happening inside you, a deeper layer begins to reveal itself. It is no longer a specific fear, no longer a memory waiting to be named, but the question of how you exist in the world. Who are you when someone is watching? And who are you when no one witnesses? The distance between those two versions is where the mask is born and quietly controls many of your choices. Jung called that mask the persona. He wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." This sentence does not deny social roles. It reminds you there is a difference between being and image. Persona helps you survive in the world. But when you identify completely with it, you begin to live as a continuous performance with no backstage. Persona is often built very early. As a child, you do not learn philosophy, you learn reactions. You sense clearly what makes you loved and what makes warmth withdraw. You learn that if you are good, you are praised. If you are skilled, you are recognized. If you are strong, you are less despised. And so you begin to edit yourself. You push the unfit parts into the dark and keep the parts that bring reward. Over time, the praised version becomes the official version. And you forget there were other parts that also belong to you. The danger is not that you have a persona. The danger is identification. When you believe you are the role, the title, the image others are used to, you give your entire self worth to external eyes. Every compliment becomes proof you exist the right way. Every criticism becomes a threat to identity. You begin to choose based on the question, will this keep my image? Instead of, is this true to me? And when the first question overwhelms the second, a silent lie begins. You can recognize persona through very subtle signs. When you enter a room and automatically adjust posture, voice, and even facial expression. When you feel a slight tension in your body because you fear saying something wrong, that lowers the value of the image you built. When you hide confusion because you fear others seeing imperfection, persona always tries to protect its impression. It whispers that you must be consistent, must be strong, must control everything. And in many situations it truly helps you survive. But if it becomes the center, you begin to live on a constant stage. One afternoon, I sat in a familiar cafe where soft light made everything seem calmer than reality. I ran into an old co-worker. His name was Stephen. In the workplace, Stephen had always been the most certain one. He spoke clearly, decided quickly, and rarely showed hesitation. In many eyes, he was stable and competent. But sitting across from me that day, I noticed something small between his sentences. There were longer silences than usual. We spoke about work, old projects, and changes in the field. Everything still followed the role. But then he stopped, looked at his coffee that had gone cold, and said very softly, "I don't know if I still want to continue like this. But if I'm not the person everyone thinks I am, I don't know who I am." That was not complaining. It was the confusion of someone who had invested too much in persona. Stephen was not afraid of changing jobs. He was afraid of losing the image that defined him. Afraid that if he were no longer strong and reliable, he would fall into emptiness. In that moment, I saw the mask did not fall with a crash. It only loosened a little. And that loosening was enough for him to see the distance between role and being. No dramatic decision was made, but there was an admission. The image he maintained no longer fully matched the feeling inside. And that admission alone created a small opening for light to enter. The mask falling in absolute silence is not a rebellion. It is not publicly rejecting every role. It is the private moment when you realize you have lived too much for an impression. You see yourself saying, "It's fine," to reassure others, while inside you are not fine. You see yourself choosing safety over truth because you fear shaking the image. You see yourself avoiding conversations that could make others see you differently. And in that recognition, the mask begins to separate from your skin. Imagine persona like a perfectly tailored suit. You wear it to step into the world, to fit, to be respected. The suit helps you stand straight, look polished, and make a good impression. There is nothing wrong with wearing it. But if you never take it off, if you sleep in it, live in it, you forget the natural feeling of your own body. You forget you can breathe without holding a pose. And one day, you feel heavy without knowing why. Not because the suit is bad, but because you forgot it is only clothing. In the stillness of night, when no gaze forces you to maintain an image, you can try taking that suit off in your mind. Ask yourself, if no one expected anything of me, what would I say? If no one judged, what would I choose? These questions can unsettle you because persona brings structure and safety. When it loosens, you enter emptiness. But that emptiness is not lost. It is space for the true being to be felt. Jung did not advise destroying persona. He advised becoming conscious of it. When you know you are wearing a mask, you have freedom. You can fulfill a role without letting the role devour the person. You can fail without feeling worthless. You can change without believing you are betraying yourself. This difference is subtle but foundational. It shifts the center from outside gaze to inner steadiness. And in that relief, you begin to sense a 100-foot drop. And in that relief, You begin to sense a steadier axis, not the axis of image, but the axis of honesty. You exist not because you are seen in the right way, but because you are living from within. When that begins, persona is no longer a prison. It becomes a tool. And behind that tool, you gradually discover something far deeper. Your real self does not need to be performed to have value. It only needs to be recognized, in silence, in straightforwardness with yourself. And that is when the mask truly falls, not so you are exposed before the world, but so you can be true with yourself. Number 8. Why you must keep this transformation private. Do you notice that the moment the mask begins to loosen, another urge appears alongside it? The urge to speak, to share, to be confirmed that you are changing. After you touch the inner truth, after you sense a very discreet shift between role and being, you may want to tell someone. You want to say, I realized I'm different. I'm not like before. And here, part 8 begins, why you must keep this transformation private. Inner transformation, through Jung's lens, is not a social event. It does not need an audience. It does not function well under the spotlight of attention. Jung wrote a very direct sentence. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This means the true journey happens in the dark, where you are looking straight at what has not been accepted. And that dark, in the early stage, is fragile. When you are just beginning to recognize persona, just beginning to see your defenses, you stand before a darkness not yet faced. Not darkness as evil, but parts not integrated. Fear of rejection, need for approval, jealousy, weakness, desires that are not pretty. When you have only just touched them, you are not yet steady enough to hold them in consciousness in a stable way. If you rush to bring that experience outside, you may accidentally turn it into a story to tell, instead of a process to live. Once, in a meditation retreat lasting a few days, I met a woman around 40. She shared that, after the first 2 days, she had a very strong experience. She felt as if she had awakened. She saw her old patterns, saw clearly how she always sought approval from family, saw the fear of abandonment she had never named. In that emotion, she said that the moment she got home, she would tell her husband and children that she had changed, that from now on she would live differently. Her voice was full of determination, almost glowing. But on the last day of the retreat, I saw her sitting alone, much quieter. She told me softly, "I think I went too fast. I wanted to turn my experience into a declaration." She realized what she touched was not a new title to wear, but an old wound being opened to heal. And a wound, when first touched, needs protection from eyes too soon. If she went home and declared she had awakened, her family might respond with doubt or even defensiveness. And then, instead of continuing to face her own darkness, she would have to defend the image of a person who has changed. This is the subtle point Jung emphasized. The unconscious does not like to be exposed before it is ready. When you have only just begun making the dark conscious, you are still easily hurt. If you bring it into the light of social recognition too soon, you may cause it to shrink. You begin telling the story of transformation instead of continuing to live it. And from that moment, the inner process risks being replaced by a new persona, the persona of the awakened person. You can see this in yourself. When you have just understood an old pattern or just seen a difficult truth, you may feel a strong surge of energy. That energy wants to act immediately, to change immediately, to speak immediately. But true transformation is not like a rational decision. It is like deep restructuring within. And that process needs time to settle, to be integrated into small behaviors. Imagine transformation as a seed just sprouting underground. If you dig it up every day to show that it is growing, you will break the roots. Roots need darkness to develop. Roots need silence to grip the soil. If you care only about the green sprout above, you ignore the most important part. Likewise, when you are just beginning to look straight at your own darkness, you are nurturing new psychological roots, new ways of reacting, new awareness. And those roots do not need an audience. Keeping it private does not mean hiding in shame. Keeping it private means protecting it. Protecting it not from others, but from your own tendency to turn everything into an image. When you tell too many people that you are changing, you may accidentally fall into pressure to maintain that image. You will start asking, am I living up to what I declared? And the fear of inconsistency will pull you back into persona. Unfaced darkness often carries shame, and shame is easily triggered by others' gaze. If you have just admitted to yourself that you crave approval too much, or that you have lived to please others, you are standing before a very fragile part. If you place that part before someone who does not understand, you may receive judgment, or worse, dismissal. And then, instead of continuing to go deeper, you will close again. Jung understood that individuation is solitary in many stages, not because you must separate from the world, but because some steps can happen only in inner space. When you keep transformation private at the beginning, you give yourself the chance to truly integrate it. What does integration mean? It means you not only understand in words, but you also begin to respond differently in a natural way. You do not need to declare that you have changed. Others will see it in your calmness, in how you no longer react as before. In that retreat, the woman I met decided to say nothing when she got home. She simply observed how she reacted in familiar situations. When her husband criticized her unintentionally, she felt the wave of defensiveness rise, but this time she did not react immediately. She saw it, she breathed through it, and that alone was a real transformation. No one knew what she had been through, but she knew, and that was enough. The lesson here is not to be silent forever. The lesson is to understand timing. When the darkness is not yet faced, when you are still learning to stay with your unfinished parts, silence is a protective space. It keeps you from being swept into the need to prove. It keeps you from turning an inner journey into a story for recognition. And above all, it keeps you honest with the process, rather than loyal to an image. Thank you for staying with this journey to the halfway point. Before continuing, take a quiet moment. Slow your breathing. Feel your heartbeat. Ask gently, is there something in me that needs protection from eyes too soon? Is there a truth I have just touched that I am rushing to speak? If so, give it more time. Not to hide it, but to let it grow. Because deep transformation does not need a declaration. It only needs you to be patient enough to stay with the dark until you can look straight at it without trembling. Number 9. The collective unconscious will resist when you change. After you have learned to keep your transformation private, after you are wise enough not to expose your inner sprout to the strong winds of judgment, another challenge begins to appear. You may think silence is enough, that if you do not declare, do not argue, do not force anyone to understand, everything will remain calm. But you will soon realize something far more subtle. Even if you say nothing, your change is still felt. And this is where part 9 opens. The collective unconscious will resist when you change. Carl Jung made this depth unmistakably clear when he wrote, "The collective unconscious is a part of the psyche which can be negatively distinguished from a personal unconscious by the fact that it does not, like the latter, owe its existence to personal experience. The collective unconscious is not your personal memory. It is the spiritual sediment of humanity, where archetypes, patterns of emotion and behavior have been preserved across generations. You did not create it, but you live within it. And when you change, you are not only touching yourself, you are shaking a larger structure. Observe this in very concrete life. When you begin to slow down in a family that constantly chases achievement, you are seen as lacking ambition. When you stop participating in gossip, you are labeled distant. When you no longer react intensely as before, others may say you are not the same anymore. What is striking is this: you are not attacking anyone. You are simply changing how you show up. Yet that change unsettles an invisible order. Every system, family, company, and community operates on an unconscious balance. Each person holds a certain role. Someone always meditates. Someone is always pressuring. Someone always endures. Someone always succeeds. When one person steps out of that role, the system feels unstable, and the system's instinct is to pull that person back to their former position to restore balance. This is not a conspiracy. It is collective psychological momentum. The biblical story of Joseph in Genesis carries profound symbolic meaning through a Jungian lens. Joseph is the one with unusual dreams, dreams that suggest he will rise above his brothers. When he shares those dreams, the reaction is not support, but jealousy and hostility. His brothers are not disturbed only by the content of the dream. They are triggered by what the dream represents, a movement beyond the familiar role within the family structure. From Jung's perspective, Joseph embodies the archetype of the individual entering individuation. He listens to the inner call, symbolized through dreams, and dares to trust it. But the collective, in this case the family, responds by excluding him. They sell him into slavery. Psychologically, this reflects a truth. When an individual steps out of the collective unconscious, the collective may resist by isolating or punishing. You may not be sold into slavery, but you may be misunderstood. You may be told you think too much. You may be perceived as distant. This resistance is not merely personal. It is the collision between individuation and collective stability. When you change, you unintentionally expose parts that others are not ready to confront within themselves. And that is uncomfortable. Imagine the collective unconscious as an invisible web of cords connecting everyone. Each person holds a position that keeps the system stable. When you move, the cords tighten. That tension creates pressure. Pressure may appear through questions like, "Why are you different lately? Are you okay? Is someone influencing you?" Those questions may sound caring, but underneath them can lie fear of losing the old order. What matters is that you do not personalize this reaction. If you believe people oppose you because they hate you, you will fall into conflict. But if you understand that they are reacting from an unconscious layer, you can remain steady. Resistance is not proof that you are on the wrong path. It is often a sign that you are touching something real. In Joseph's story, he does not return to apologize for dreaming. He goes through the desert, through slavery, through imprisonment. These trials symbolize the phase of isolation every individual must endure when separating from the collective unconscious. Yet he does not return with bitterness. He returns with maturity. He neither rejects his family nor dissolves into them. He stands in a new position, one in which he can participate in the collective without being controlled by it. This is the key point of this section. The goal of individuation is not to separate from humanity. The goal is to no longer be unconsciously controlled. You do not leave the collective to live in isolation forever. You step out of unconscious identification so that you can return with consciousness. But before reaching that point, you must endure resistance. The practical application is clear. When you change, do not rush to convince others that you are right. Do not try to prove it with words. Let your change be expressed through consistent behavior. If you argue, you will be pulled back into old loops. If you hold your inner axis, the system will gradually adjust. Not because you force it, but because you no longer play the old role. The resistance of the collective unconscious is also a test. It compels you to ask, am I changing because I am honest with myself, or because I want to appear special? If you change only to stand out, you will be easily pulled back under pressure. But if you change because you cannot live otherwise and remain true to yourself, you will endure. There is a deep paradox here. When you no longer need the collective's approval, you begin to be respected in a different way. Not because you rebel, but because you are consistent. That consistency gradually softens resistance. Others may not understand immediately, but they sense the stability within you. The final stretches of this journey require subtle maturity. You will realize that resistance is not an enemy. It is the natural reflex of a system being altered. You do not need to fight it. You only need not to return to the old role out of fear of losing your place. When you can stand firm without needing recognition, you have crossed an important threshold. The moment you can remain among those reactions without feeling the need to explain, without fearing exclusion, without panicking when others disagree, is the moment you are ready to enter the next layer of the journey, where individuation is no longer opposition to the collective, but conscious harmony with it. Number 10. The guiding archetype appears when you are no longer defensive. However, once you have moved through the resistance of the collective unconscious, you will notice that the outside world does not necessarily change overnight. What changes is you. The external opposition softens not because the world immediately transforms, but because you are no longer as defensive as before. And in that state of non-defensiveness, another archetype begins to emerge from deeper layers within, the guiding archetype. In Jungian psychology, archetypes are not mere imaginary images. They are ancient structures of the psyche, patterns of energy that exist in the collective unconscious and manifest through dreams, intuition, symbols, and inspiration. When you are still living within defensive mechanisms, when you are busy protecting your image, your position, your role, it is difficult to hear the voice of an archetype. Defense creates noise. It makes you reactive, tense, and vigilant. But when you no longer have to constantly defend yourself against the gaze of others, a new space opens. And within that space, something deeper begins to speak. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." This is not a vague statement about awakening. It points to a redirection of energy from the outside to the inside. When you are no longer preoccupied with what the world thinks, when you stop battling collective resistance, you gain the capacity to look into your own heart without avoidance. And in that direct gaze, the guiding archetype appears. The guiding archetype may take many forms. The image of a teacher in a dream, a strong intuition about a direction, a recurring symbol in your life, or a clear feeling that you should stop or move forward. What matters is not the specific form, but the psychological state that allows it to surface. When you are still defensive, you search for answers outside. When you are no longer defensive, you begin to realize that a deeper part of you has always known the way. Imagine someone who has lived for years in vigilance, always analyzing others, anticipating reactions, adjusting behavior to avoid conflict. When they begin to release that defensiveness, at first, they feel empty. Without fighting, without proving, they do not know what to do next. But then, in a very ordinary moment, perhaps while walking alone or sitting quietly by a window, they feel a subtle urge to change careers, to end a relationship that no longer fits, to begin something long postponed. That urge is not loud. It does not come from pressure. It comes from stillness. From a Jungian perspective, this may be the emergence of the inner guide, an expression of the self, the center that coordinates the whole psyche. When the ego no longer occupies the entire space through defense, the self has the opportunity to speak. The self does not argue. It does not shout. It communicates through a deep sense of rightness. It does not promise ease. It brings clarity. There is a crucial difference between reaction and guidance. Reaction arises from fear. Guidance arises from connection. When you are defensive, you react. When you release defensiveness, you listen. And only in listening can the guiding archetype be recognized. It is like a compass that has always been there, but you can see its needle only when you stop shaking it constantly. Picture the defensive mind as a room filled with mirrors, where you endlessly see reflections of others. You become obsessed with how you appear in each mirror. But when you let go of defensiveness, the mirrors fade, and you discover a window behind them. That window does not reflect you. It opens to a horizon. The guiding archetype is like the wind entering through that window. You cannot see the wind, but you can feel its direction. The subtle truth is that an archetype never forces you. It does not threaten. It is patient. You can ignore it many times. You can return to defensiveness. But each time you are courageous enough to remain still, to refrain from immediate reaction, to stop chasing approval, you will hear that call again. And each time you listen, clarity deepens. In the process of individuation, this marks a turning point. Before this, you were confronting your personal shadow. Then you endured collective resistance. But once you have passed through those stages without losing your center, you begin to be guided rather than pushed. Being pushed means acting under pressure. Being guided means acting from inner agreement. This does not mean fear disappears. Fear still exists, but it no longer governs you. The guiding archetype does not eliminate darkness. It enables you to move through darkness with orientation. You no longer ask everyone what you should do. You begin to ask yourself. And the answer, even when difficult, carries a different quality. It does not require proof. Practically, you can try something simple. When facing an important choice, instead of immediately seeking advice or analyzing pros and cons, sit quietly for a moment. Ask yourself, if no one were judging me, if no one were affected, what in me feels more alive? What opens rather than contracts? The answer may not come in words. It may come as a lightness in your chest or an unexpected calm. That may be the guiding archetype at work. Jung emphasized that the self is the totality of the psyche, transcending the ego. When the ego becomes less defensive, the self can regulate. And when the self regulates, your life begins to assume a different structure. Not a structure imposed by society, but one shaped by inner wholeness. You no longer chase perfection, you seek integration. This path is not glamorous. No one awards you a title, yet you will notice something profound. You no longer feel as lost as before. Even when external circumstances remain unstable, inside you, there is a point of support. That support is not blind belief. It is the result of having faced your shadow, endured resistance, and released the need to defend your image. And if you are still here, quietly moving through each layer of defense that has fallen, each resistance that has passed, each silence that once seemed meaningless, but was in fact restructuring you from within, then it is very possible that your guiding archetype has already begun to move. It does not appear as a dramatic call, but as a deep, calm knowing. If you are courageous, share your story, not to prove you are awakened or how far you have come, but to mark something more essential. You have begun to listen. This journey is not about creating a more impressive version of yourself. It is about returning to what is most authentic, where you no longer need defense, no longer need performance, only the courage to live from your deepest center. Number 11. The silent encounter with the self in deep sleep. After you have learned to listen to the guiding archetype in waking life, another door opens, a door that does not belong to the day. There, you are no longer the one trying to understand, trying to analyze, trying to choose. There, the ego recedes. And in that recession, a silent encounter unfolds, an encounter with the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is not an improved ego. It is not a better version of you. Jung stated clearly, the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality. This means the self does not appear when you strive for perfection. It becomes evident when the scattered parts of you begin to connect within a larger structure. Deep sleep is one of the rare spaces where the ego no longer dominates the entire system. By day, the ego resembles a manager constantly at work. It evaluates, analyses, compares, and worries. It tries to maintain an image, sustain control, and understand everything. But the self does not operate through control. It operates through wholeness. And for that wholeness to reorganize your inner structure, there must be time when the manager steps away from the control panel. Deep sleep is that time. From a neuroscientific perspective, during slow-wave sleep, activity in the prefrontal cortex, associated with conscious thought and ego control, significantly decreases. At the same time, networks related to memory and emotion reactivate in new ways. The brain begins the process of integration. Fragmented memories are linked. Unprocessed emotions are reorganized. Through a Jungian lens, The parallel is striking. When the ego steps back, the total psyche can self-regulate, not through willpower, but through the deeper structure of the self. I once attended a Jungian-oriented retreat focused not on achieving transcendent states, but on learning to listen to inner symbols. There was a woman named Sophia. She did not come seeking enlightenment. She came because she felt fragmented. She described herself as a house with too many closed rooms, each containing a part of her, with no corridor connecting them. In the first days, Sophia tried to understand everything. She took notes, analyzed, and asked many questions. But on the fourth day, after a deep meditation session without theoretical discussion, she said she slept long and dreamlessly. The remarkable part was not the absence of dreams, it was the feeling upon waking. She described opening her eyes and no longer feeling divided. No grand decision had been made, no declaration of change. Yet there was a clear sense, as if the parts within her had sat down together. This is essential. The encounter with the self does not always arrive through vivid symbols or dramatic visions. Sometimes it appears as unexpected steadiness after deep sleep. The self does not require spectacle. It requires space. And when that space is present, when you are no longer forcing yourself to understand immediately, to fix immediately, to perfect immediately, the self begins its work. Imagine your psyche as a star-filled sky. By day, sunlight is too strong to see the stars. You see only the bright surface of consciousness. But when night falls, when direct light disappears, the stars emerge. They were always there. You simply could not see them. Deep sleep is like the necessary darkness that allows deeper structures of the soul to reveal themselves. Not for you to control them, but for you to realize you belong to something larger than the ego. After the retreat, Sophia returned to her life, work, family, and familiar rhythm. Yet something was different. She no longer reacted from fragmentation. When conflict arose, she felt a pause before responding. That pause was not something she forced. It appeared naturally. From a Jungian perspective, one might say the self had begun to coordinate psychic energy, allowing the ego to stop defending constantly. Deep sleep cannot be commanded the way you command positive thinking. You cannot order the self to appear, but you can create conditions. As with a seed, you cannot pull it to make it grow, but you can water it and leave the soil undisturbed. Deep sleep requires release, and that release is not only physical, it is a release of control. Many people fall asleep with their minds still tense. They carry phones, messages, and unresolved thoughts. The ego continues operating even when the body lies down. In that state, the self has little room to reorganize. But when you begin to see sleep as part of your inner journey, not as dead space between 2 days, your relationship with night changes. At a deeper level, the encounter with the self in deep sleep is not about providing ready-made answers. It is about restoring wholeness. You may not know exactly what to do the next morning, but you will feel less divided, less tense, less conflicted. And from that reduced inner conflict, wiser choices begin to arise. This leads to a simple yet powerful practice. Before sleep, instead of drowning in information, spend a few minutes in quiet darkness. No need for religious prayer, no complex meditation. Simply acknowledge that there is a part of you larger than your anxious thoughts. You may whisper inwardly, I am willing for the deeper part of me to reorganize what needs to be reorganized. Then allow yourself to sink into sleep. In the morning, do not immediately rush into old rhythms. Stay for a few seconds in that just awakened state. Notice the first feeling. It may be lightness. It may be a subtle intuition. It may simply be calm without a clear reason. Do not analyze too quickly. Let it exist. It may be the trace of the silent encounter that occurred when you were no longer in control. The self does not require blind belief. It requires that you not block its path. And deep sleep, something you may have taken for granted, may be one of the quietest roads leading you back to your own wholeness. Number 12. Individuation begins when you stop seeking approval. After that deep sleep, Sophia did not leave the retreat as someone enlightened. There was no halo, no grand proclamation. She simply returned quietly to her daily life. Yet within that ordinariness, a fundamental shift began, not loud, not dramatic, but foundational. She stopped seeking approval as a condition for feeling worthy. And at that very point, individuation truly began. For years, Sophia had lived within an invisible reference system. Every decision passed through a filter. Will this disappoint someone? Will this make me look incompetent? Will this cause me to be judged? She did not call it fear. She called it maturity, responsibility, and social sensitivity. But when she looked deeper, she realized much of her energy had been spent maintaining an image, preserving harmony, and keeping others satisfied. She lived as if others' gaze were the only mirror reflecting her worth. Jung wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. There is no universal formula for living. When you force yourself into a common mold to gain approval, you may wear shoes that please others, but constrict your authentic steps. The more you try to fit, the further you drift from your inner center." Individuation is not becoming different for attention. It is becoming conscious enough to see that what fits others may not fit you. From a Jungian perspective, the need for approval is closely tied to the persona, the social mask that allows you to function in the collective. Persona is not evil. It bridges the individual and the community. But when you identify entirely with it, you live to maintain an image rather than from the inner center. Individuation begins when you gradually withdraw energy from that identification, not by destroying roles, but by no longer treating them as your final definition. One afternoon, Sophia received criticism from her superior. It was not severe, but it was direct. Previously, she would have reacted defensively or tried to prove herself right. This time, she felt the familiar wave rise, the tightening in her stomach, the faster heartbeat, the spiraling thought, "What do they think of me?" Instead of reacting automatically, she paused. She saw that the pain was not only from the criticism, it came from the deeper belief that without approval, she would lose value. Here, individuation occurred not as a theory, but as an inner act. She asked herself, if not everyone agrees with me, do I still exist fully? The question did not yield immediate comfort, but it created space. In that space, she sensed a support not entirely dependent on external feedback. Imagine you're a lamp in the center of a room. When you depend on approval, you constantly adjust the brightness to meet others' preferences, brighter to impress, dimmer not to disturb. Individuation is allowing the lamp to shine at its natural intensity, whether or not it is liked. This does not mean ignoring others. It means not distorting your light just to please. Sophia began with small steps. When asked for her opinion, she expressed what she truly thought, even if not fully agree with it. When she disagreed, she did not hide behind vague phrases. When she needed rest, she did not over-justify. These shifts did not make her rebellious. They made it clear. And in that clarity, something surprising happened. She felt less exhausted. The need for approval consumes enormous energy. You must constantly read others, anticipate reactions, adjust behavior. It is a subtle form of defense. When you stop seeking approval as a lifeline, you free that energy. It can then be used for creativity, reflection, and authentic connection rather than maintaining an image. Jung emphasized that individuation requires accepting the possibility of being misunderstood. When you no longer play the role the collective expects, you create discomfort. But that discomfort is not a sign of error. It is evidence that you are no longer unconsciously fused. Individuation does not isolate you from the community. It allows you to return as a more whole individual. Sophia still faced the fear of rejection. Some days she wondered if she had become too rigid. Sometimes she longed for the comfort of being liked by everyone. But each time, she remembered the previous fragmentation, the feeling of splitting herself to fit. And she realized the cost of constant approval was too high. When you live dependent on approval, you are like a boat always anchored in a harbor to avoid waves. There, you are safe. But you never discover how far you can sail. Individuation is the moment you lift anchor. You know there will be waves. You know there may be disapproving glances. But you also know the boat was not built to remain still forever. The more Sophia stopped seeking approval, the clearer the difference between her and the image others knew became. This did not isolate her. It allowed a deeper connection with those who respected authenticity. Relationships based on performance faded. Relationships based on inner respect are strengthened. Individuation does not begin with a declaration of independence. It begins when you dare face the fear of rejection without immediately seeking soothing. When you can stand in a room full of people without needing all to understand you. When you can be alone without feeling deficient. When you can say, "This is me," without adding conditions. And if you hear Sophia's story, as if it mirrors something within you, perhaps you stand at that threshold as well. Begin with one small step. The next time you are about to speak or act only to gain agreement, pause. Ask yourself, if I were not afraid of losing approval, what would I choose? You do not need to change everything at once. Just be honest with the answer. Because individuation does not begin with outer rebellion. It begins with a quiet return, a return to your own center, where worth is no longer measured by others' nods, but by inner wholeness. Number 13. You will wake up different, but you do not need to explain. And when you have gone deep enough into the process of individuation, when you stop seeking approval as a mirror reflecting your worth, when you no longer have to adjust yourself to fit the invisible expectations of others, there will come a morning when you open your eyes and realize you are different. There is no solemn declaration. There is no milestone marked on the calendar. It is only a quiet shift in how you feel about the world. You are still there, in the same room, with the same people, the same responsibilities. but the center from which you look, think, and respond has changed. And the strangest thing is that you no longer feel the need to explain that change to anyone. Before, each time you felt more mature, more understanding, you may have wanted to share, to be recognized, to have someone confirm that you had come far. You wanted others to see your journey so it would become real. But when individuation truly begins to take root, you recognize a subtle truth. What is truly profound does not need external confirmation in order to exist. It stands on its own within your inner structure. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This sentence does not encourage you to deny what has happened. It emphasizes that you have the right to choose how you shape yourself after all those things. And when you choose to become something different, you are not required to justify that choice before any court of the collective. There is an American film I watched many years ago and later re-watched from a completely different perspective. The Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont and adapted from a work by Stephen King. On the surface, it is the story of a man wrongly convicted and his journey of escape. But if viewed through a Jungian lens, it is an inner journey of individuation under confinement by a collective structure. The prison in the film is not only a stone wall, it is a symbol of the labels, identities, and judgments society places upon a person. When you are tagged criminal, failure, not good enough, it is very easy to identify with it. And when you identify, you imprison yourself. Andy Dufresne does not fight the prison with noise. He does not stand in the yard and shout that he is innocent. He does not spend his entire life there trying to convince everyone that he is different from the image they see. He quietly preserves an inner space the prison cannot touch. He builds a library, helps others learn, and most importantly, he silently digs a tunnel for nearly 20 years. His change is not announced. It happens in the dark, in a persistence no one sees. The moment he steps out of the tunnel, standing under the rain with his arms spread wide, is not a performance for others. It is a personal right. There are no spectators. There is no explanation. He does not go back to the prison to explain to anyone that he has matured, remained steadfast, and changed. He simply walks on. And that walking speaks for everything. When you wake up differently, your experience may be similar. You no longer feel the need to return to old conversations to say you have changed. You no longer need to correct your image in other people's eyes. You simply live according to the new structure. And that structure will reveal itself in very small things. You no longer react intensely to criticism. You no longer lose sleep over a cold glance. You no longer have to explain yourself in every situation to avoid being misunderstood. Imagine you once lived in a room full of mirrors. Each wall was a mirror reflecting you through someone else's perspective. Wherever you went, you saw yourself through their eyes. You adjusted your posture, your voice, your emotions to fit each mirror. Then one day, those mirrors gradually disappear. Not because you smash them, but because you are no longer standing in the middle of the room. You walk out of that room. And when you are no longer surrounded by reflections, you begin to feel yourself directly, without intermediaries. You wake up differently because you no longer look at yourself through other people's gaze. This change is often not noticed immediately by others. And that is the challenge. Before, you may have wanted someone to say, "I see you've changed." Now you realize that if the change depends on that confirmation, it is not yet truly steady. Real maturity does not need certification. It is like roots growing deep under the ground. No one sees the process, but one day you realize the tree stands more firmly against the wind. Jung spoke of the self as the center that coordinates the entire psyche. When the ego is no longer obsessed with being recognized, the self has space to operate. And when the self operates, you act from wholeness rather than from defense. You no longer say the right thing just to be agreed with. You no longer stay silent just to be liked. You no longer exaggerate or diminish yourself to fit the situation. You are simply you. In The Shawshank Redemption, the character Red once feared the outside world because he had grown used to prison. Many of us have also grown used to the prison of approval. When you step out, at first there may be a sense of emptiness, no applause, no constant feedback. But in that emptiness, you begin to hear your own voice more clearly. You do not need to explain because you are no longer seeking legitimization. This waking up differently brings with it a new kind of dignity. You are no longer easily stirred by praise. You no longer collapse under rejection. You stand at a more neutral point, a deeper point. And from that point, you see everything more clearly. Not because you become perfect, but because you are no longer pulled in every direction by the need to be accepted. There may be people who sense you have changed and feel uncomfortable. They may ask or even judge. But this time, you are no longer rushing to prove you are still the same as before. You understand this journey is yours. You do not need an approving counsel. You do not need a validating certificate. You only need to live consistently with the shift within. And if these reflections leave in you a silence worth treasuring, you can press like on the video as a small sign, acknowledging that moment, not to applaud or support in a formal way, but as a quiet confirmation that you paused, reflected, and felt a subtle movement within yourself. Sometimes, a very simple action is enough to mark that this journey is real. No need to display it. No need to explain. Only continue walking, quietly and steadily, from the deepest center of yourself. Number 14. Be silent and let the results prove themselves. When you arrive here, after you have moved through layers of quiet transformation, after you have woken up differently without the need to explain, one final principle gradually becomes clear. Be silent and let the results prove themselves. Not silence because you fear being judged. Not silence because you lack confidence. But the silence of someone who understands that what has truly changed within does not need to be promoted. It will reveal itself over time, through how you live, through how you respond when no one is watching. No longer need to speak to affirm your worth. Before, each time you changed something, you may have felt the urge to share immediately, as a way to reassure yourself that the change was real. But the deeper you go into the inner journey, the more you recognize a paradox, the more truthful something is, the less it needs to be declared. If the inner structure has been rearranged, it will express itself outwardly without an introduction. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists." When you still resist silence, still fear that if you do not speak, then no one will know you have changed, you are still seeking assurance from the outside. But when you stop resisting the feeling of not being seen, when you accept that not every transformation needs to be recognized, you enter another level of maturity. You no longer fight invisibility. You allow yourself to grow within it. I once heard the story of a man working in a fiercely competitive environment. He always felt he had to present himself as the best person in the room. In every meeting, he spoke a lot, cut others off, and argued constantly to prove that he was sharp. Inside, he carried a quiet fear. If he did not stand out, he would be left behind. A family upheaval forced him to pause work for a few months. In that compelled silence, he began to realize that all of his energy had been built on the fear of being looked down on. He did not return to the company with a declaration that he had awakened. He did not say he was changing his leadership style. He simply began practicing something very simple, listening fully before responding. At first, his silence confused some people. They thought he was losing his edge. But gradually, meetings became more effective. When he spoke, people paid more attention because his words were no longer dense. They carried weight. He did not explain his inner journey. The change showed itself through the quality of his presence. From a Jungian perspective, when a part of the unconscious is brought into consciousness, the energy trapped in defensive mechanisms is released. That man had once identified with the persona of the best one. When he recognized the fear behind that persona, he was no longer controlled by it. His silence was not weakness. It was a sign that the ego no longer needed to constantly assert itself. The self began to coordinate, and the self is not loud. Imagine transformation as the process of recalibrating a mechanical clock. When the mechanism inside is misaligned, the hands may run fast or slow. You can keep looking at the face and complaining that the time is wrong. But the real adjustment happens in the small gears inside, where no one can see. The watchmaker does not stand outside the shop to announce, "I am adjusting the mechanism." He opens the case, fine-tunes each detail, then closes it. When the clock runs accurately, it does not need to be repaired. It simply keeps the right time. You are the same. When the inner mechanism has been recalibrated, when you no longer react automatically from an old wound, when you are no longer driven by the fear of needing recognition, you do not need to say you are balanced. Others will sense it in how you handle pressure, in your calm when facing conflict, in the clarity of your decisions. If you keep talking about your balance, it may still be fragile. Silence is also a way to protect the process from premature interference. When you share a change before it is steady, you are easily affected by others' reactions. A doubtful remark can unsteady you. A compliment can inflate the ego again. But when you keep it in silence, you give it time to root. And when the roots are deep, the wind can no longer knock it down easily. Jung emphasized that individuation is a solitary path. Not solitary because you separate yourself from the world, but because no one can enter your darkness for you. Silence here is space for you to continue working with yourself without needing the gaze of the collective. When you no longer depend on external feedback to validate the process, you are walking on your own feet. In practice, this principle is very simple. When you are no longer triggered by a provocation, let that new behavior exist on its own. Do not rush to say you have gotten over it. When you begin to say no to what does not fit, do not seek agreement to feel at ease. Observe how your life changes when you stay firm. The results will reveal themselves through the quality of your relationships, through your level of energy, through the clarity of your mind. Understand that other people's perception Understand that other people's perception takes time, and you do not need to push them. You only need to keep living consistently. At this point, silence becomes a conscious choice. You choose not to turn your journey into a story meant to impress. You choose not to use transformation as a way to elevate yourself in other people's eyes. You choose to let the results, the concrete changes in behavior, in living, speak. And when they speak, they do not need to be loud. They carry the weight of truth. That truth is not noisy. It does not need an argument. It does not need protection. It simply is. And when you live from that truth, your life gradually becomes evidence, not evidence displayed, but evidence felt. Others may not know what you have passed through in the dark night, but they will see the light in how you walk. Not the light of the show, but the light of an inner structure that has been recalibrated. In that silence, the results speak. As this journey closes, what remains is not a clear conclusion, but a very subtle feeling spreading through you. You may not be able to name it, but you know you have gone inward in a different way, not to gather more knowledge, but to touch a deeper layer of yourself. And at that layer, every transformation happens in silence. The spirit of this journey was never to create an experience for you to carry out and tell. Instead, it invites you into something deeply private. Listen, sink down, and tell no one the result. Because what truly touches the unconscious must be protected from eyes too soon. When you look inward instead of seeking external confirmation, you begin withdrawing energy from old roles. And that quiet withdrawal forms a new structure, steadier, more truthful. Tomorrow, no one may notice you are different, but you will notice. In a situation that once made you lose control, you will pause one beat longer. In a moment that once made you doubt yourself, you will feel a little steadier. Those changes do not need to be announced. They are like an underground current that has shifted direction. Not loud, but persistent. And if you are patient enough, you will see your life gradually reflect that shift. Tonight, let what has been awakened continue to work in the dark. Do not force yourself to understand everything. Do not try to turn it into a manifesto. Trust the process. And if you want to continue the journey of exploring the depths of the mind, continuing through layers of the unconscious and parts not yet named, press subscribe to accompany the next stages. Not to search for a more perfect version of yourself, but to patiently return to the real person, the one waiting for you in this very silence.